We want to welcome in Megan Brantley, the VP of Research from LikeFolio.com, and throw some data at this, because this is ultimately what investors are likely wanting to focus in on is, hey, how excited were people about this once they saw it? Were they talking about it? Were they saying they were going to buy it? And if so, which ones were they trying to buy?
Yeah, so this is our favorite time of year when it comes to Apple, because this is when consumers really tip their hand and tell whether they're going to buy this iPhone. You know, the iPhone is still a really significant driver of Apple's revenue and also helps capture people into this service environment that they're building up. And so what we saw this year when we looked, we had to kind of take a special stab at it, because there wasn't just this single release date. You know, we had the keynote in September and we had this special iPhone event just on Tuesday. And what was interesting is that in September, demand mentions for the iPhone, even though the iPhone wasn't even announced yet, were higher than any other product that they covered. So in the first chart, or the first thing I want to talk about, is the overall demand for the new iPhone lineup. And for this, we're seeing it come in about 4% lower than last year. But one note I'll add to that is that last year we saw extreme success with Apple, right? Demand for the iPhone last year was pretty high. And we also saw success with the iPhone SE that they dropped this spring. And so these are those demand mentions. And note that we did include those demand mentions on the keynote itself just because it was so significant. So I think that the nature of the beast, there wasn't this just massive drop on a single day. So it makes it a little tough to compare year over year. But overall, demand for the iPhone is still strong. One note that's really promising for Apple is that whenever we look at model comparisons, so there were 4 different models that they released, ranging from $700 all the way up to $1,400. And actually, the higher end models were the top of consumer preference lists. So people who were actually talking about buying a specific model, they talked about buying that Pro Max more than they did the Pro, and then they talked about that more than they did the Mini. I know this looks like, 10%, 10%. The iPhone 12 Pro and iPhone 12 Pro Max were really close, but the Pro Max actually edged out that Pro. So that means that consumers are initially drifting to that higher end model. I think that that's really good. Moving forward, you can see that obviously just generic iPhone 12 mentions, they dominated demand, because sometimes people may not want to talk specifically about exactly the model number that they're getting. But for those that did call out the model, that Pro Max was the top preference. And so I think that that's really good for Apple moving forward. And that's definitely something we're watching as pre-orders start today, to say, okay, now that consumers can actually buy this, what are they spending their money on in the next month? And are they pulling the trigger? How does it compare to last year?
Yeah, Megan, and just from the data that you guys have, and I think I saw something from Piper Sandler. They had a survey of 1,000 people that said only 10% were thinking about getting the new iPhone. But I think we saw this same type of rhetoric last year with the iPhone 11, and that thing exploded. People were buying it across the board. So do you guys look at this as far as your mentions go, that, hey, maybe I'm going to buy one later? Or is it just mostly mentions that, yeah, I might buy it, and that's why some of the metrics are lower?
I think that the way that we look at this is it's going to be really critical now that pre-orders are open, to say, okay, now that consumers can actually pull the trigger and they can actually spend and pre-order and buy, are they still drifting to that higher end model? That's a really positive indicator for us. Last year, they weren't initially drifting to that higher end model. So I think that that's a differentiator to kind of support this building demand. I think another thing is sentiment. So when we look at sentiment last year on the Apple drop, it was around 48% positive. People were really disappointed that the iPhone didn't have 5G. They thought the camera was weird. This year, it's a completely different story. On the date of the release, it was closer to 66% positive. So that's a huge difference in overall sentiment. Consumers are happy that the iPhone had 5G. They're now really pleased with this camera performance, especially now that they've seen what that, tri-camera can actually perform and present when it comes to photo quality. And they like the display. So I think that this is a positive indicator for Apple. We're really, really interested to see how consumers react once they actually get their hands on this model. That's when we saw mentions start to take off last year. So I think it's going to be really critical to watch in the next month or so once people start talking about this, once this whole 5G thing becomes real, how that impacts Apple. But definitely right now, even though purchase intent mentions were about 4% lower, we still think that this is a really strong year for Apple. We still think that this is a really positive look for Apple because of the way the model breakdowns are breaking out and because of how sentiment is tilted toward this product.
Megan, is it possible that the iPhone has shifted from a discretionary purchase that we get excited about into more of a consumer staple? And what I mean by that is the phones last longer. They don't break quite as easily. At least I've noticed that in my own life. And to be frank with you, the phone works pretty fast on 4G. I can load a website in, a matter of seconds. Do I need to go from a snap of the finger to half a snap of the finger in terms of loading these websites? Like, what is Apple bringing now that's getting investors excited? Is 5G enough, or is this kind of like the TV? We're at HD 4K, and yeah, the technology is getting better in different TVs, but if I can't tell with my eyes, then why would I go buy it?
I think right now that consumers can't really conceptualize what 5G is going to bring to the table. So I think that's why it's going to be so critical to see consumers actually engaging with a phone on a 5G network, actually allow technology and developers a chance to catch up to this, the speed and what it can provide. Because if you think back, I'm sure we all used to be really happy with how our phone performed when all it could do was call or send a text message. And I'm sure it did that just fine. But can you imagine not having the functionality that we have now? So I think it's really exciting to see what will be developed. I think that, that's the long game picture that Tom was talking about earlier. And so that's definitely something we're watching. 5G impact right now, necessarily, are we seeing the results? Not really. However, that's something that we're monitoring really, really closely, especially as consumers start to use the phone and interact with the technology.